This conference will now be recorded.
Good evening and welcome to the City of Warrenville Community Development and Planning Committee of the Whole regular meeting on Monday, May 10th, 2021. In accordance with social distancing requirements, Governor Pritzker's disaster proclamation, Section 7E of the Illinois Opens Meeting Act, 5 ILCS 120/7 (E) end of parentheses, and a determination made by the mayor of the city of Warrenville, David Brummel, this meeting will be held virtually. Deputy Clerk Gravetti, may I please have a roll call?
Chairman Widener,
Here.
Mayor Brummel,
Here.
Alderman Anderson,
Here.
Alderman Ashauer, Alderman Berry,
Here.
Alderman Davalos,
Here.
Alderman Goodman,
Here.
Alderman Churchill,
Here.
Alderman Wilson.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Now you can either stand and join me with the pledge or say it quietly at home. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now's the time we set aside for citizens' comments. We will hear verbal or written comments from the public, and any citizen or any member of the public wishing to speak, please come to the podium, adjust the microphone, state your name, address, and offer your comments. I will call one person at a time, and that will be easy because we only have one person in the meeting room tonight that wishes to offer public comments, and that's Mr. Bob Siebert. Bob, welcome.
Bob Siebert, Albright Court. Our refuge company, Grout, is not treating all landlords the same. I have 3 rentals, houses. My one rental last week called Grout to take my name off the bill and to place her name on the bill. Grout refused. Today, I called Grout to request that my name be taken off the rental house. Grout replied, if the renter left, I would have to pay the garbage bill. My response, if the renter is gone, there is no garbage. I spoke with 2 other landlords in Warrenville, representing 4 rental houses. Each of their houses has the renter's name on the invoice, not their name. My 3 rentals, one has the renter's name on the invoice, one has my name on the invoice, and one, according to Grout, they don't have anybody or don't know about the house. My contention is that all landlords should be treated the same, and that it is my contention that my name should not be on as an individual responsible with the contract that I have with the renters, that they are responsible for the garbage. The franchise agreement, which I have here, states nothing in the agreement. It only defines customers. It states customers means owners, comma, residents, comma, and occupants of residential dwellings in the city participating in waste collection services. I think a key word there is participating. I believe that any classification of individuals should be treated the same. And I suggest that in this case, I am not being treated the same as other similar landlords.
Thank you. Do we have any email comments or anyone on the phone who would like to make comments? Okay, I don't think we have anyone else who would like to make comments. Once we conclude public comments, there will not be another opportunity for the public to comment. Now it's time for official and staff comments, beginning with the mayor. Mayor Brummel?
Thank you, Chairman Widener. I have nothing at this time.
Thank you. Alderman Anderson
No comments tonight.
and Alderman Barry,
I have no comments. Thank you.
Alderman Davalos,
I have no comments tonight. Thank you.
Alderman Goodman,
Yes, I just wanted to mention for anyone who hadn't seen the email today from the Assistant City Administrator or any of the city's media postings that there is a vaccine clinic being made available at the community building by the Park District on Wednesday, May 19th from 11 to 1 for anybody age 18 and over. They will be providing the single dose Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is easy and convenient, and if anybody who is interested, they should ask the Park District about it, but you can sign up or just walk in. So that's a wonderful thing to have available for our residents. Thank you.
thank you for bringing that to our attention. Alderman Krischel,
I have nothing tonight, Chairman. Thank you.
thank you. Alderman Wilson.
No comments this evening.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We'll move into the business of the meeting. And this evening's first agenda item is consideration of AV upgrades to prepare for return to in-person public meetings. And Assistant City Administrator Christina White will introduce this agenda topic.
Thank you. So it's been roughly 14 months now of virtual City Council and Committee of the Whole meetings, but it appears that we are likely heading to a return to in-person meeting at some point in the near future. Staff is anticipating that the exemption under the Open Meetings Act that allows us to have virtual meetings will likely change at some point, and we will go back to having meetings in person. So in the agenda backup are 2 quotes to upgrade AV equipment in the City Council chambers. The first upgrade would allow for video connection using the existing cameras in the City Council chambers. The purpose of that is currently we have our audio synced up with our virtual meeting platform that allows us in the room to use the current microphones and the audio system to communicate with everybody that's at home virtually participating or calling into the meeting. This would function much of the same way when we return in person. We would be able to tap into the 4 cameras in the room so that anybody participating on an ongoing basis virtually could see the council and the staff and any of the officials speaking during the meeting, as well as be able to hear them. We think that's important because some of the public has gotten used to participating in our public meetings by calling in and attending virtually. This provides some convenience that we didn't have before. And we think it likely that the council may want to continue that ability and that convenience to allow people to participate and engage in a virtual platform, even when we all return in person to the council, City Council and Committee of the Whole meetings. So that upgrade is roughly $3,000. The second upgrade is to replace the ceiling mounted projector and drop down screen. For any of you that have been in the room in recent months, the current projector, which was installed somewhere in 2007, is very difficult to see, especially when you're further out into the corners of the room. It does need to be updated, and we are recommending a flat panel LED monitor to replace the projector, which will increase functionality as well with sharing presentations throughout the room. And I think also make it easier for everyone to see the screen from various parts within the council chambers. That upgrade is just over $24,000 or shy of $25,000. So in total, we're looking at about a little bit less than $28,000 to the budget. So those are the upgrades. The AV quotes are included in the agenda backup materials. And I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. We'll begin with Alderman Anderson.
I'm supportive of this initiative. I think it's important, and clearly I like that we're tapping into some of the existing video, and do agree that in the long term replacing that projector makes sense. I have no idea if 90 inches is the right size or not. I've done a couple of these in my current profession, and aiming too small comes back to bite you over time. So I think just making sure we've somehow simulated it in a way that if you're across the room, that what we do end up investing in is something that will be effective for the whole council. It's my only request. That's all.
Thank you. Alderman Berry, comments?
These prices, especially with the larger screen, the total price is the $24,729. That doesn't, it says includes the purchase and the installation. So that's everything, all the hookups and everything. There's nothing else beyond this pricing. I mean, we don't have to pay freight or anything like that.
That price is inclusive of the hardware and the installation. The only unknown cost is if we need to make adjustments to the electrical to supply to the LED screen and into the wall. There might be some additional costs through electrical contractor that is not included in the AVI quotes.
So our public works would not be able to do any of that work. We would have to get an outside contractor for that.
I believe we typically contract out for electrical work. I don't believe anyone on staff at Public Works is able to do electrical work.
So the people that will be doing the installation, they can't look at this in advance and tell us that? The people that did the quote?
It is included in the quote that we will likely have to have some electrical costs, but until we get a better picture of what we're installing and have an electrician come out, we won't know what those costs are. AVI does not do electrical work. They do the engineering and the installation of the audiovisual equipment, but they do not do electrical. So they can contract out, but we would prefer to use our contractor for that.
Okay, so we cannot get our contractor to come out in advance and give us a quote for the work.
We can request that they come out and provide us a quote. I'm not sure exactly until they get into the wall if they're going to know exactly what is needed, but they can probably provide us a general estimate.
Okay, yeah, that would be helpful. I mean, we don't need to do, $10,000 worth of electrical work for something like this. So at least we would have some kind of an idea if it's going to cost, somewhere between, $500 and $1,500, or is it going to be closer to $2,500? What is it going to be to do the kind of work? If they can give us a ballpark estimate, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Alderman Davalos.
Thank you. Yes. My only question is, can elected officials or staff still participate virtually, even though we have the in-person setup?
That is going to depend on amendments to the Open Meetings Act. As it stands, we are meeting virtually because there is a temporary exemption. I'm sorry, I'm getting feedback. There's a temporary exemption that allows us to have virtual meetings because of COVID. There are some bills that have been introduced to extend virtual participation into the future, but those have not been approved or even, I don't think, brought forward to discuss yet. Prior to the COVID exemption, the only time elected officials could participate virtually is if they were either ill or had a business-related or work-related meeting that prevented them from attending. It was very limited under the standard Open Meetings Act language. So until we know more about whether or not these additional bills that are being introduced will actually make it further, once the governor removes that exemption from the Open Meetings Act under COVID, everyone would have to be present in terms of the elected officials. As far as staff, I don't know if there is anything that requires in-person attendance. We'd have to check with the attorney, but I can't imagine we would have the council attending in person and not the staff, so.
I'll just jump in. Legally, the staff does not have to be in person, but the elected officials would be a quorum. A majority of a quorum, a quorum of the elected officials has to be here to have the meeting. But to participate, unless you're doing so under that exemption or the remote participation program that the council approved under the Open Meetings Act a few years ago, which is if you're ill or if you're traveling for business only at this time, pending new legislation, you would have to be in person to be able to vote and participate in the meeting as an elected official.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Goodman.
Yes, I guess my question would be about this contractor. How are they doing? Has their performance improved?
They are reliable when it comes to planned work. We still sometimes struggle when there is something that comes up unplanned in an emergency situation, something breaks down because they have limited technicians. Getting them out here in short order sometimes is a challenge. I don't know that that's different with any other AV contractors, but I will say with COVID, they were much more active and reliable in appearing, I think, just because everybody was having virtual meetings.
Okay, because it's something that I'm continuing to be uncomfortable with, giving no bid contracts to a company which has given us subpar service. Mm-hmm. Especially such a substantial contract. When you look at this, you know, we're paying over $10,000 for basically the screen. You know, we could buy an LED screen from anybody. There are lots of commercial sources for LED screens. Mm-hmm. So the fact that we're going through the contractor must be, in your view, and as you've presented here, you know, because of their familiarity with our equipment and being able to install it more smoothly than getting somebody else to do that. But if their performance continues to be subpar, I'm going to continue having concerns, especially about giving them work that we could have done by somebody else fairly easily, like buying a screen. Mm-hmm. So does staff have those concerns, or do you feel that those concerns have been assuaged?
I will say that when I started to research other AV companies, there are not many out there that provide this level of AV service. There's certainly lots that do home audiovisual type of installations. What makes this slightly more challenging and complicated from my view is a lot of this equipment has to be engineered to work with our current equipment and the equipment that's been installed in that room in previous years. And so there is a need to have knowledge of how the room is configured and how each piece of equipment works with every other piece of equipment in order to function properly that AVI has, because they installed all of the initial equipment and have done all of the engineering in that room from the beginning. Bringing in a new contractor, certainly I would expect that they might be able to learn and get up to speed. The challenge with that, like with information technology consultants, is that they generally have a specific way that they do things that might vary from how other IT or AV or technically capable people do things. And they will likely want to change the engineering in that room, and that requires a lot more assessment of all of the pieces of equipment. Some of the conversations with AVI in recent months has been that initially when that room was when the equipment in that room was engineered and installed, it was with the intent of having a lot more functionality and doing different videos and different communication pieces. At that time, those things changed over time. We aren't using it to the way that it was initially engineered, and technology has changed drastically over the last 10, 15 years. I am looking to simplify the room as much as possible because of the skill level and the amount of time and energy that we use. That equipment is generally used for our committee of the whole and council meetings. We aren't producing videos and high quality communication pieces in that room. At some point later in life we might, but we haven't thus far. And that room, I believe, is a little bit more advanced than what we currently have the staff and resources to handle and manage. So that doesn't fully answer your question. I'm confident that AVI can install the equipment and engineer this installation, and that right now they are the best option that we have. Looking for other AV companies, it's just a limited pool, and there's a lot more that goes into whether or not they can come in and engineer the room to the level that AVI can because of their knowledge of the system as it operates now.
Okay, I mean, a couple of these things, you know, the 3,055 quote has to do with two pieces of equipment that add up to about $600, one of which says it's a USB compliant device. And then the other $2,400 is for installing it. You know, most people know how to plug in a USB cable. So I hope that other piece of equipment is terribly complicated if it's going to take $2,400 to install. I'm not an audiovisual expert, but I do look over this, and I know some of our history with this company, and it just gives me some concern. So I guess this is the best we can do for now. I'm certainly in favor of having better communications equipment when we return to in-person meetings, but I would like, I suppose, some sort of future update from staff on how this company does going forward before we give them more no-bid work ever again. Especially since we continue investing large sums of money in the audio and video equipment in the room. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Crucial.
Thanks. My only question was the total number here. So on the second quote here, the grand total was just over 22,000, but on the agenda item, that's 24,700. So I wasn't sure where the other $2,000 came from, or if I was missing something.
So the original quote with the 22,229 had built in an 85-inch display. Staff is recommending the 90-inch, which is an additional $2,530.
Okay, so that's the difference. All right, and then yeah, my only other question was, so if you were to measure what we have today, obviously you can shrink it or make it bigger based on the projector, but is that roughly about 90 inches?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure I can answer that. Yes, I think.
I mean, to Alderman Anderson's point, right? We just want to make sure that we're not reducing size for sure. If we're going to be spending this much money, if it's, you know, another, just to make sure it's the right one. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
Administrator Copley.
That's a good question. I'm looking at the screen right now when I'm in the room. We're not actually using the full screen there. We have not measured the pull down screen. I did go and measure the current, what is it? Smart board, LED screen.
Yep.
It's not a smart board. The screen that's in the gallery, it's similar to the one that's down on the lower level as well. That is smaller than 90 inches. I believe it was 85 inches measured diagonally across the screen. So this will be bigger than that. If you're familiar with remembering back pre-COVID, for those that were around, we used to meet in there for closed sessions and have some presentations on that screen. That one works really well for that smaller room. I believe the 90-inch will. We will verify the size of the screen though, because it's a good benchmark to at least look at and see if that seems reasonable. The brightness and the intensity, crispness, if you will, of the LED screen will be so much better. I think it will be even if it was just slightly smaller, and I'm very sensitive to what both you and Alderman Anderson are saying. We want to be sure we don't undersize it and have to then buy a new one. That would be a bad idea, bad practice. But we'll check that and verify it before the council meeting.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Before we go on to Alderman Wilson, I thought I saw Mr. Anderson. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I realize I should probably wait till the end, but just to that point, if there's a way to mock it up, you know, there's a lot of LCDs that you can put on a stand, just wheeling it in there for a couple meetings at the size that you want, just to make sure that we have it right before we're putting it up on a wall is just something to think about.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Wilson, do you have a question or comment?
Just a comment. I've heard a lot of information that sounds like we might be able to look at something perhaps a little different, or perhaps a little larger. That's not my field at all. But I think that what staff has done up to this point has been fantastic. We definitely need to improve the system that we have in there. And I'm looking forward to the day that we can come back in there and all sit at the same table. So under the circumstances, I'm totally agreeable with what has been proposed.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to Mayor Brummel. Do you have comments or questions?
Thank you, Chairman Widener. Just, I support the staff proposal. The concern about the size that was brought up makes a lot of sense to me. So if there's some way to verify that, maybe check with other municipalities and see what they've used and what they found successful for their council chambers, whatever it takes. But that would be a concern of mine. Otherwise, I'm happy to move ahead with this. It's going to be nice to get back in the same room again.
Thank you, everyone, for your comments. Yeah, I would think that there'd be standards that relate to the distances and the ability to visualize details on a screen. So I'm sure we can find those. There's no other questions or comments. I would consider a motion at this time.
I would recommend the City Council approve the AV upgrades presented for a total of $27,784.
Second, Alderman Davalos.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, and ask Deputy Clerk Gravetti to read the roll, please.
Alderman Berry,
Aye.
Alderman Widener,
Aye.
Alderman Crucial,
Aye.
Alderman Wilson,
Aye.
Alderman Goodman,
Aye.
Alderman Anderson,
Aye.
Alderman Davalos.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. Our next item on the agenda is a consideration of the revised Trailhead project implementation actions. Senior Civil Engineer Christine Hocking will present this agenda item. Ms. Hocking?
Hello, good evening. Thank you very much. So this agenda item is related to the Trailhead project. As all of you are aware, at the mid-April, a memo was distributed to the City Council describing a pause or a delay in the Trailhead project. Staff had been recently informed by ComEd during their review process that a number of Trailhead project elements, including the restroom building and pavilion, as well as the Illinois Prairie Path Heritage Display, were not allowed in the ComEd easement. The ComEd easement is located within the DuPage County DOT right-of-way, which is where the Illinois Prairie Path is located, as well as the ComEd transmission lines. This information was, these review comments were a complete 180 in the previous review comments that we had gotten from ComEd, even back until the beginning of the project, which was 2016. So staff decided that it made sense to pause the project and speak with ComEd about the review comments, clearly define the ComEd easement, where exactly it was located, and prepare a plan to move forward. Obviously, we know that this project is very important to the city, the community, the Civic Center area, and staff has since that point been trying to work with ComEd to put together a plan to move forward. Since that point, we have spoken with ComEd about the location of the easement. They could not provide any clear documentation of where the easement was located. So we followed up with DuPage County DOT, and they actually informed us and confirmed today that the ComEd easement does lie within all GDOT parcels. So that is the area, the majority, it's a 66-foot easement parcel, which is where the Prairie Path and transmission lines are located, as well as some adjacent smaller parcels where the previous City Hall was, and the old, obviously, train station center area, as well as some smaller 15-foot wide parcels, et cetera, that encompass part of the parking lot in that area over there. So at this point, staff will be continuing to communicate with ComEd in the next 2 weeks to see if there is a path forward. Staff wants to discuss with them the possibility of putting the building potentially still on the easement, but maybe on the outside of the easement, located outside of where the Prairie Path is and their transmission lines, as far as possible, away from their large concrete foundation, which is where they clearly noted to us where they have a lot of their concern with future maintenance of those concrete foundations, as well as access to that area. That's one of their biggest issues with the elements in the area, is access for maintenance, as well as just any potential other uses that they have in the easement area in the future. So vertical elements like a building, vertical elements even like benches and seating elements that are located in like the heritage display can impede them and their equipment and vehicles from traversing the easement and getting to their transmission lines and concrete foundation, whether it's an emergency or whether it's just routine maintenance. Again, this was news to us, but we're trying to work with them to create a path forward. Like I said, within the next 2 weeks, we will be speaking with them a little bit more detailed to see if there is a path forward. And if there is a path forward, staff has outlined in the memo the next steps that we would be taking to essentially redesign parts of the Trailhead project and work with ComEd to make sure that these redesigned elements are located in places that are acceptable to their transmission line right-of-way group. So this would include coordination with the consultant, as well as a new meeting with the Trailhead work group to get their recommendations, and that would be then presented to the City Council at a committee meeting in July, as outlined in the memo. This timeline is all to ensure that we, like I said, if there is a path forward, that we meet our federal grant expiration date of its end of April is the last letting date that we would be able to get on for IDOT. So that the outlined timeline describes a January 2022 IDOT letting date, which would lead to a spring construction schedule. Spring construction schedule is ideal at this point to get all of the major elements in, establish grass before all of the major city related festivals that would be occurring in 2022. Like I said, if the discussions with ComEd in the next few weeks are unsuccessful, staff would be updating the City Council. At that time, we would not obviously have the consultants do any redesign or any work and expend any more city dollars or staff time on this project. But like I said, staff will be communicating with the ComEd immediately and just confirming what we can and cannot do at this time. Like I said, I have a more detailed outline of the implementation action plan in the memo. If there's any questions on that, I can take those at this time, or if anyone has any other questions related to the project, the delays, and our path forward.
Thank you. Once again, we'll begin with Alderman Anderson for questions and comments. Alderman Anderson.
Sure. Yeah, a couple different questions. I thought when I'd read in the memo, we thought we were going to have let's say IDOT says, no, you can't, our easement's fully off limits, that we were going to try to create an alternative that allowed us to do something not infringing on their easement. I think what I heard in your comments were, given now how we understand the easement, if they have no give on what we can do, then we may not have an option of what we could do at the trailhead. Did I hear that correctly?
That is correct. There is very limited area outside of the easement that a pavilion restroom building can even go. Obviously not ideal locations at all. That includes just essentially along Stafford Place or removing or moving the gazebo. Options that in the past that we presented to the work group, and they were essentially not supportive of going down that path. That would also include a lot of redesign, a lot more construction costs, and definitely it most likely would really delay our project to the point where STP funding would not be available for it.
And so the request for the 22 to 28,000, is that only needed if ComEd gives us an opening of what might be possible? Then we would need that 22 to 28. If they don't give us an opening, then those dollars aren't needed. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
And then you mentioned April as the IDOT letting date. The document indicated January 21st.
So April is the latest letting date that we can go on. IDOT has letting dates every approximately 2 months. So April is the very last letting date that we can get on. There is one, I believe, in early March, I believe. And then there's one in January. We would be pushing for that January letting date in order to begin construction in the spring. Otherwise, if we move on to the next letting date, or we end up on that very last letting date in April, we would have to add some additional language in the contract for the bidding that would restrict construction until after the city events, including summer days, which could increase construction costs. Because if you imagine a contractor wants to get work done right away, especially with all of the construction costs increasing as of late, they would have to assume or try and assume what the prices would be, 6 to 8 months in advance. So staff would think that the construction costs would come in later if we go for a later letting date.
We lost Alderman Anderson.
Yeah.
Why don't we move along to Alderman Berry, and we can pick up with Alderman Anderson when he returns. Alderman Berry, go ahead with your questions and comments.
Sure. This is all very disappointing. All I can say is that hopefully, I know you will do your best to try to make this move forward. I know it's very difficult to work with IDOT. It's very difficult to work with Commonwealth Edison, probably even more so than IDOT. I know it took us a long time with the Route 56 streetscape work group to get ourselves organized with IDOT. It took years. So I wish you a lot of luck, and hopefully we can go forward with this. I know that it would be an asset to our community, and just an enjoyment for the residents. So very good luck to you.
Thank you. Alderman Anderson, you disappeared off the screen momentarily. You're back now. If you would like to go ahead with any further questions or comments, please do so. Alderman Anderson, you escaped the screen for a few moments, and we see that we have a visual on you now. If you have any further comments or questions, please go ahead and unmute your mic and ask Ms. Hocking if you have comments.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I had to call in by phone. Can you hear me okay, Chairman? Okay.
Yes, very
So
clear.
I've lost audio on my computer, though I can see everybody. I guess my last question was, given these delayed times, and it's probably too early to understand this, do we have another pooling of expected increase in costs because we're looking at a projected construction time? Or is it too early to know that?
I believe if we stick with the letting date outlined in the memo, the January letting date, the construction costs would be the same if the building is still the same size and everything. Obviously, the building size could be reduced. That would lead to less of a construction cost, but it wouldn't increase it. Now, if we maintain the same size of the building and we push the letting date to the very last letting date that we are allowed, which is that April letting date. I was explaining before, I think you kind of jumped off, but we would have to restrict the construction to wait until after summer days. I think that would be something that City Council would obviously support, to wait until that point. And because of that, some contractors could potentially bid the construction costs higher because they have to wait so long. We all know building materials are through the roof right now with, wood and other materials. So staff believes that may increase the construction costs if we do have to wait, if we do wait till that last letting date.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Alderman Berry, are you done with your questions and comments, or do you have further commentary you'd like to make?
No, I have nothing further to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Davalos?
Well, I commend all the people that have previously spoken on how calm they are. I am not. And so this is unbelievable to me. And I know everybody else is feeling the same thing. But I remember the days when so many Warrenville residents objected to comment putting those poles right in the middle of town like that. And I'm not going to argue whether it was necessary or not, but they certainly didn't listen to one person in the city, elected official, residents. Anybody was heard by comment. And I'm not saying that isn't typical for them, but after all the work staff and the council have put in these pandemic times, I can't imagine the money and the staff time that has now been wasted, although I'm sure we can build on some things. But and I know that municipalities can sue public utilities, I'm sure, but this is really unbelievable to me that they've waited so long to come up with this. So I don't want to go on and on because I'll just be angrier and angrier. But I want to commend Christina. That was a lovely presentation. I've never seen anybody stay so calm when I'm not calm at all. And that was a lot of good information. I think we clearly know the way forward, what staff is going to do and what the council will do and what some of the changes may be, the risks involved. I can't imagine the other stakeholders who have been so excited about this. It just breaks my heart. But these things happen. I mean, these things happen. But part of me is speechless. So thank you to staff. Appreciate it. We're ready to go with your advice and your information, and we'll make appropriate decisions. It's too bad that it'll cost even more, but this is what happens, I guess. But anyway, thank you. Sorry to ramble on and on. I'm done.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman?
I would second Alderman Davalos's indignation. I would ask that staff stay in touch with our overlapping taxing districts that are having events in this area over the course of the summer, just so they know what the status of this was. I had a Warrenville and Bloom meeting recently where they started talking about all the different changes they were going to have to make to planting in the Old Town area, and I had to say, actually, you know, that construction is almost certainly not happening this summer, and they weren't aware of that. So I hope that staff can communicate with Warrenville and Bloom so that they can make their plans appropriately based upon this evolving situation. They would really appreciate that. And people in the community care enormously about how our entryway looks, how our civic center area appears. So yeah, the last minute switcheroo by ComEd is, as Alderman Davalos said, very disappointing. And I guess the only question that I would have would be, if we don't hear anything from ComEd, are we going to be spending any of this $25,000 or so trying to get some designs done so we can have something ready to respond to their concerns, something to hand them and say, would this be okay with you? Are we trying to get them to sign off on this once it's designed, or what's the order of this given their expected lack of responsiveness necessarily?
I do have to say, since this reviewer came on board, ComEd has been pretty responsive to our emails and correspondence. City Administrator Coakley has been in touch with our ComEd liaison. We actually are trying to schedule a meeting for next week on Monday to discuss the next steps forward. So we intend to coordinate with ComEd first before we bring in the consultants. And, you know, the idea, if there is a path forward with, you know, potentially locating the building on the outer edges of the easements, we could have our consultant put together a draft concept plan and present that to ComEd before we would go to the work group. You know, it doesn't make sense to go to the work group and then have ComEd say, no, this doesn't work either. So that would be the initial steps with ComEd. But throughout the course, ComEd has stated, you know, they would obviously need to review the new locations in more detail with our final design engineering plans. And so we would be coordinating with ComEd after that initial, you know, confirmation that our concept plan would be acceptable.
So, I mean, I guess just trying to get a sense of it, what kind of feedback did they give you? That there was just, we don't want you building in our easement, or not this size building in this spot on the easement? Do you have some sense going forward of changes you can make that would actually make them happy?
Yes, you know, their biggest concern obviously was the building. I mean, their statement is no buildings in the easement at all. Doesn't matter the size, the how big it is, how small it is. It's the actual building in the easement. They also defined vertical elements that aren't allowed in the easement, including seating, water fountains, the bike racks, tall trees. They mentioned items like retention areas, like rain gardens and detention ponds. We do have a rain garden in this project. These are all elements that they've described is because when they need to come in for maintenance, they don't want to have anything in their way for when their equipment needs to get laid down. They showed us the type of equipment that they use. They showed us a picture of it being used on a similar pole. They explained that, you know, these elements become in the way and they have to spend more money essentially to try and navigate around them. So those were the biggest things that they had initially, or they had responded to more recently. I had followed up with them via email trying to confirm, you know, well, you know, some of these elements like a bike rack or, even a water fountain or the bike changing repair station, those are bolted to the ground. Those can be moved. If you're going to be preparing to do maintenance and you're going to be bringing in all these vehicles and laying down matting, I mean, that doesn't happen overnight. So if we need to move them, or my other suggestion was if we move them more on the outer edge of the easement away from these, the foundations, the big foundation pillars that they have, is that acceptable? And they were more open to suggestions like that. They didn't like the rain gardens. We put those in mostly because of stormwater management requirements. We could do other things like dry wells. There is a lot of bank run in the area as well, so we could minimize those. They also mentioned obviously the Illinois Prairie Path Heritage Display signs. There was going to be a sign obviously related to that and some stone seating around it. Again, the vertical elements of the stone seating, they didn't care for. The heritage display was really close to one of their foundation that's out there, and they said if that's outside of a 75-foot radius, it could be allowable even with the sign. We still have to kind of negotiate about the stone seating because staff believes that's a pretty important piece of that heritage display. Someone to come in there, take a look at the sign and just sit down and enjoy the area. So we think that's something that we need to talk to them about next week as well as the building location. So these are the main elements that they had concern with, and it's all mostly related to being able to maintain their that area and mostly access to their foundation, transmission foundation, concrete foundation.
Wow. Okay. Wow. That sounds like everything in the whole project.
Yeah. I mean, that's when we received the email, I was like, what? This was never in this detail, this straightforward. This should have been given to us in the very beginning, and it wasn't. So.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I guess I'll just echo what Alderman Berry said and wish you good luck.
Thank you.
I'd like to turn to City Administrator Coakley, who has a couple comments at this time. John?
Thank you. Christine has answered some of the things I was going to fill in, but just to assure everybody, because one of my first thoughts when I heard this complete change was, how could we miss that? Christine compiled for me in a review internally the written correspondence from ComEd over the years, from 2016 to the present. The bulk of that, it started with working with DUDOT, DuPage Department of Transportation, whose property it is, but they have an easement from the 40s with ComEd. I learned way more about this than I ever was thinking I would in life. The comments always were, well, we don't I'm going to paraphrase, something to the effect of, we don't really allow a lot of things in the right of way. However, this looks like an acceptable project, or comments back and forth, early days before Christine was even involved, but in the last year, it got more detailed, a year or 14 months or so, when Christine Hocking was involved, and she would ask very specific engineer type questions. Well, if this is, can this be allowed? We're not going to be interfering with your power lines. They're very tall, and we could be outside of the area where we need to do maintenance. And the comments back were, well, yes, I think that can work out. Your project looks acceptable as long as it's not over this height and so many feet away from those concrete structures, et cetera. And our city team worked with everybody in the community and designed the project around all of that feedback. And there is a lot of feedback over time. I did note, and she had pointed out, there's several different representatives from ComEd, and apparently there's a whole lot of divisions that have to review everything. Some are more significant, I understand, than others might be. I've been having a lot of conversations with our external affairs manager about this whole matter since it came up. So I've gotten a lot of background there too. But the people Christine were working with were legitimate folks, and they gave consistent support to our design and our project until somebody came back from some kind of leave and took over the review. And in my words, looked at it as like, again, paraphrasing, why are we even talking about this? We don't allow these things, period. This is probably 4.5, not quite 5 years later into the project being given supportive feedback from them. I had a lengthy conversation with our external affairs manager. We decided we would speak about it first. We're getting our team's city group, our city team together from Public Works, Christine, of course, also, and the team of the people that were reviewed from ComEd to have a discussion about how we can go forward with this. Can it be allowed? And Christine has been defining, there's the easement where the lines are, where there's a 66-foot wide swath, so to speak, where nothing's supposed to be under there. Well, if you go out there, there's quite a few things out there through the years, through the decades, and they've been okay with drinking fountains and benches and trees and signs and all kinds of stuff. Used to be a building that I worked in. My desk was about 15 feet over and right underneath, but 15 feet over from those lines and not far from some of those structures. And there was a building there, but that was pre-existing. It's no longer there. Fortunately, we're in a much better building now. So it's a change in direction for us completely. Alderman Davalos, Alderman Goodman, you will appreciate it very subtly, subtle as I can be. Just made sure that our external affairs manager is very good to work with. She's only been around a few years in that role. I give her a little bit of the history of the community and that the Prairie Path is extremely important to our community for many reasons. And that somewhere, and I didn't have the dates, but I believe in the early 90s or late 80s, the city was very unhappy with the ComEd power lines going in at all and filed a lawsuit, which, as I recall, anecdotally went all the way to the at least Illinois Supreme Court. And I want to make sure they understand this could be a community issue beyond just the frustration that we're experiencing. And certainly expressed my hope that that doesn't come to pass, but we really want to make sure that we can work together and find some way forward. So we're working to that. We're going to do whatever we can to try to work that out. But ultimately, we have learned, and the DuPage County State's Attorney reviewed all of the documents because the Department of Transportation was a little unclear on what ComEd rights were also when this all blew up in March, and has made it very clear that no, ComEd does have a very strong language easement and complete control over what can and cannot be within their easement. But then, as Christine said, there are other properties adjacent to that where there were some support structures or other land the county had that was part of, not necessarily part of the tracks, but part of other things that served the train when it was here. And the easement, she just got today, clarity, goes over all of it. So we'll be working with them. There's really no reason in our minds that those other adjacent parcels can't have this. They have nothing to do with access to the structures, the power lines, or anything else. I said you could drive what's out there right now, and if we could move this project, you could drive a fleet of ComEd vehicles in there, do all the maintenance you need to, and you will never affect anything. And if you run over a bench, we'll replace it, and we understand you're not going to pay for it. So I thought that was helpful background. This isn't something that we missed. We checked it at every step. Our staff, I wasn't involved, and has emails in writing of support comments that said, yeah, that should work. We can approve that. We'll work with you on that. That should be fine. And then all of a sudden, no, absolutely nothing. Just as we're about to finalize everything and go out to bid. So yes, there's a lot of frustration. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, Alderman Krischel, do you have any questions or comments?
I do. So if I remember right, the building that we're referring to is the restroom facility, right? That's the one we're talking about. So that to me is probably one of the more important pieces of this project. And so to hear that, we're going to try to squeeze it in somewhere, if we can. My fear is that what if we can't, right? And so what does that mean for the rest of the project? Do we move forward with the rest of it? This project has been increasing in cost ever, for a long time, and that's probably one of my concerns. Is that on paper it's $28,000 more for some more engineering. I'm just afraid that that's not going to be, the end of the increase in costs, right? And so I think at some point we have to look at it and say, when's enough? When are we? Where do we draw the line? We got to put a stake in the sand and say, no, that's the end of the discussion. So I'm not saying that's what it is now. I'm just that's that's on my mind. So that's it.
Thank you. Alderman Wilson?
Couple questions. Yeah, I'm very upset. I thought way back when this thing started, it might have been nice if we had known exactly where their lines are drawn in the sand. And we found them out. Is the Prairie path within their zone or not?
Yes, it is.
It's in their zone.
It's in their easement, yes.
All right. So, my question here then is the fact that are we ever going to be able to get them to agree to any kind of a compromise? It doesn't seem at this point that they're willing to compromise at all. Any comment on that? Does it sound like they're still working on this thing?
Yes, I mean, like I said, we've had from their initial comments that they provided us pretty much saying no to everything. I've asked them to clarify a few of the items, obviously not the building location, but some of the other vertical elements. They seem to be able to work with us. And after that initial email that pretty much said no to everything, we had a conversation with ComEd, and just they then followed up after that with a little bit more of a not backing off, but more of a we'll work with this. We know that this is an important project for the city. We want to be good project team members. They were more willing to talk with us about the things that they initially said in their email. I'm not saying that they're going to be allowing everything in the building to go exactly where we want it to go. However, they've expressed some willingness to work with us on this. And I know the City Administrator Coakley has, spoken with our liaison, and, they are open to having a discussion. So I think that is a positive step. I know that they don't probably want to have the city hate them. They do have an easement within our community, and a large part of it. Other communities as well have the same easement and same issue. Yeah, I guess I'm more of a optimist, so I'm hopeful that they would be willing to talk about it at least. And if we need to go, into a higher, talk to the decision makers at ComEd and really push this, I think, staff is willing to do that.
Okay, I know I was on that committee, with the Trailhead thing just recently, and the building I know is the important difference. That's the thing that extends into their easement that they possess. So I'm just wondering that if you can work something down with that. I hate to see us have to go right back to the drawing board and start from scratch. It's been an awful lot of investment of personnel, time from the city, from individuals, from all the interested parties in this thing, that I'd like to see it be successful. But we can't be conceding everything that we might have as a possibility to ComEd for their lack of informing us, or at least of us being aware, which is a question of the very easement at the very time. So I have a real problem with this, and I'm not so sure I'm ready to invest a whole lot of extra money into it. It's already expensive. A lot of people have spent time and money on this. So I need to be convinced that it's money that we're going to spend is usefully spent. So that I'm hesitant. Thank you.
Thank you. I have just a couple questions. Does staff feel like the easement that ComEd now has is excessive, in that there was once a building that was a former train station that was within that easement? That same building eventually evolved into becoming the first city hall. I just wonder whether or not you feel like the space there in is excessive.
Do we feel that ComEd's easement is excessive?
Yeah, the amount of space that they're taking up for their cause.
The amount of easement that they have right now, I mean, it was all owned by the railroad, and so that's why then it was deeded to the county, but that easement was maintained in perpetuity from the beginnings of the railroad. Do they need that area? I believe that they need a majority of the area around their concrete foundation. They asked for 75 feet, but that does allow for a building to be located potentially outside of that 75-foot radius and within, one of their easement areas, just further away, furthest away possible. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. And it seemed like this project was rolling along kind of with those conditions identified with ComEd representatives until one person came back from an absence.
Correct. Yes.
So that person came back from the absence, ended up kind of going against the recommendations of others and what everyone else's judgment was as far as a reasonable approach to the project that we had been working on for years. Is that fair to say that?
Correct. Yep.
I just think that, and do they understand that there's like a four-party, four-organization partnership that's involved with this, that it's not just the city of Warrenville, that there's, DuPage County, the Park District, and Illinois Prairie Path Organization is all contributors and partners in this?
In terms of the costs of the project, it's only the city and obviously the federal grant. So those are the contributors from a financial standpoint. But from a stakeholder standpoint, obviously there's a lot of people that use the area, but the property owners are the city, which is mostly obviously City Hall and part of the parking lot. And then DUDOT, DuPage County Department of Transportation, actually owns the parcels that are located obviously along the Prairie Path and transmission lines, as well as part of a parcel that includes like the eastern half of the parking lot. Part of that parking lot is actually on a DUDOT parcel. However, the city has a lease agreement with DuPage County Department of Transportation to use the DUDOT parcels and to maintain those areas essentially, on our side of the Prairie Path. So that's why we are allowed, we maintain the area, we put up Christmas decorations, etc. On the trees. We've done the streetscape project in that area. So the city has a lease agreement with DUDOT to do those types of activities on there. The Park District's role in this, obviously they're part of the work group. However, they are the ones who work with the city to put on the Park District related events. So they ask the city and they ask for permits, to perform their activities on the city parcels as well as the DUDOT parcels. So there's a lot of different owners, stakeholders, and then easement is over all of the DuPage County DOT parcels. It's not over, as far as we understand it, any of the city-owned parcels. And then the Prairie Path, IPP, they're a nonprofit, and they obviously help to maintain the actual Prairie Path.
But all those groups have like invested in the design and with time and expertise to some degrees, and it just seems like if there's redesign costs or if there's any further changes that need to go on, ComEd should enter in as a viable partner with this situation and help to keep the project rolling forward, because they were at one time unanimously in front of it and pushing it forward until we had one individual return and kind of put the the stop on the project. I just don't understand how they cannot be, enlisted to, further the project rather than stop the project after all that they've been involved with. And I know there's a, a lot going on behind the curtains and with the different representatives of ComEd, but I just, think that at some point, and I don't know when, but it might be worthwhile for the city council to make a strong statement, identifying the facts and pushing this out, so that, ComEd can be enlisted as a partner and the good neighbor they want to be, or they're at least that they're attempting to, front themselves as, and somehow get them involved in the solution, now that they've caused this disruption, and also, be a partner in the costs. I would really like to see this. And I guess that's the end of my comments. I really don't have any questions. And I guess I share a lot of disappointment along with the other council members. And with that, I'll turn it over. I see City Administrator Coakley has his hand up, and before I give it to the mayor, I will turn it over to Mr. Coakley. John?
Thank you. I just wanted to chime in on your concerns and comments, Alderman. One of the main reasons that I've gotten involved working with the external affairs manager, or our liaison, and that meeting is set up for Monday with both teams to discuss all this, is exactly to determine what is a way forward. There does seem to be willingness to work with us still on this project, as difficult as it's become. But that's the key point there, is to get everybody together on the same, it'll be a virtual call, but at the same place at the same time, instead of one person giving us one input and I'm talking to somebody else and Christine's working with their review staff, to get everybody on the same page, see if this can be done. We have some, our staff has worked on some options, but we want their feedback. I keep being asked, when are we going to submit the final plan so they can review them again? Well, we're not going to do more plans until we get their input on it. But exactly what you're saying is get more of a partnership here so we can collaborate. We've been trying to do that for 5 years, but we need them to stick to their comments. I can raise the topic with my counterpart there about any cost sharing. I foresee that it's very difficult just knowing ComEd specifically in utilities, but we certainly can raise that question and concern. And I will certainly be comfortable raising it, as this is some of our council, quotes, is very interested in, because of all the problems with that regard, short of a formal request, that I will raise it in those terms and see. But I have shared with the external affairs manager exactly what you were talking about. This was not just something the city came up with one day and designed this without checking. We were working with you. We're working with the county Department of Transportation, who owns the land. The easement is ComEd's, but the land belongs to the county. We work closely with them. Our staff worked closely with ComEd to get input, and we were being given supportive input. But this is also a community collaboration with the Park District, with the Prairie Path Corporation, with the county, with multiple other persons, including aldermen. This is a major project for the community, and that's part of their acknowledgement of it being very important to us. But we will continue on that, and we will keep working on it. We're hearing your comments. We have shared those. I want to assure you, though, we have shared those already in multiple different ways, and we're going to keep working with them. It's a difficult. I sent an email, and as soon as I got that, I worked with our staff to craft that to my counterpart, saying, I've got two things here. One is a major complaint about how your communications have changed, how you communicated with us clearly, and I sent her a copy of all the emails showing all the way back to 2016, where they gave us support and at least tacit approval of these changes. But I also, it's a request that we need to work with you to move this thing forward, because if we, like any group where the most of the power is on the other side, we've got to work with them to move it ahead. And we don't want them to just out of hand just say, well, absolutely not, go away. So we need their review. We need accelerated review. We need their input. We need them to drop other things and work with us. But we're taking the all above approach, and we'll keep pushing it until either we get this project redesigned and can move it through, or we hit a wall that we just can't get beyond. But I want to make sure everybody understands that we're not giving up. We're not just lying down on this, but it is extremely frustrating, but we're going to keep working.
Okay, please echo our, serious, concern over this and, deliberation and how long we spoke about this, and that we're very concerned about how it's going to go forward and the ultimate costs and the timing of it. And that are things that really fall on them to provide us with answers about. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mayor Brummel.
Thank you, Chairman Widener. I certainly share everyone's upset and dismay and frustration with the situation. ComEd has in the past been difficult to work with, to say the least. This is a ridiculous situation that is not our fault, that was made possible by some miscommunication in their organization. John Colke and I are meeting with ComEd representatives Thursday morning, I believe. I will certainly share everything I've heard tonight with them and make sure that they understand the importance of this project to the community. They understand the importance of their cooperation and flexibility to not put just a roadblock and say you can't do it, but to sit down and work with us and find a way that we can make this happen in a way that is close to what we had envisioned. It certainly does bring back memories of those power lines coming through town and how they railroaded that all over us, and we had no say. And even when we strongly objected, they just said we're going to do it anyway. It reminded me of the power lines in Cantera when we talked about undergrounding some of them, because that's what was done originally. And they said, no, it's cheaper for us to put them up top, and that's what we're going to do anyway. So we had to put together a group, a consortium, to come up with some money to work with them to get those undergrounded so as not to ruin the ambiance in Cantera. We wanted to underground cables along Warrenville Road at some point, and we were willing to pay for that. And we were told, sure, you can do that, but if at some point in the future we decide it's better to put them on poles again, we'll put them on poles again. So they haven't exactly been good neighbors ever to our community. So it's very disappointing to be in this situation again. But I assure you, I will make sure that the representatives we meet with Thursday understand where we're at and see if it's possible to go any higher. But in the meantime, staff has done a yeoman's job in pushing this in a way that didn't poke them in the eye, but made sure that they understood that this is important to us. So I really appreciate staff and what they've done over the past few weeks. And we'll see what we can do. But for the moment, then we just need the staff recommendation to be endorsed tonight by you folks. I hope that would be the case. Remember, no money is being spent tonight. It's just trying to get to the point of deciding whether or not we want to do that. So we'll get through this hopefully in a way that'll benefit Warrenville.
Thank you. I'm greatly relieved to hear that you're going to mention the other history of them recognizing that they were trying to be a good neighbor, and perhaps in the majority of people's opinion, were not good neighbors to the city of Warrenville. And this is their third opportunity to perhaps become a good neighbor. And we hope to see that come to fruition. Alderman Berry?
I just have one comment talking about good neighbors. I don't know if everyone knows this, but Exelon Corporation is the corporate owner of Commonwealth Edison. And talk about neighbors, they are our neighbors. They're in our town and in our city. And I bet you there's a lot of people who work in that building who actually live around here. It's amazing that they would treat us this way since they are actually part of this city. And so I think they should be very much ashamed of themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Appears we're in round two. If anybody's got anything, otherwise we could move ahead with a motion. Okay, I don't see anyone that wants to make any comments or has any more questions.
I'll make a motion. Alderman Berry.
Go ahead.
I'd like to recommend, make a motion to recommend the city council direct staff to implement the staff recommended Trailhead project implementation action plan.
Second, Alderman Davalos.
Sorry, we have a motion and a second. There's no further discussion. Deputy Clerk, can I please have a roll call? Oh, I think Alderman Wilson has a comment. Go ahead, Alderman Wilson. Alderman Wilson, did you have something you were saying?
Okay, I'm sorry. I was impacted there. That includes the expenditure of some monies, and I just wonder whether or not we can withhold the expenditure of any monies until we get some additional information about the procedure of this whole project.
Or the funding, the money that's in the motion. Ms. Hocking, do you have an answer to the question regarding expenditure of funding with this matter? Could we go ahead with a motion without an expenditure?
Correct. At this time, there's no expenditure related to the motion. If we, I guess it all depends on if ComEd, our discussions with ComEd are successful, then the next Public Safety and Finance Committee, we would recommend an approval of the change order for the consultant contract to move forward with this concept design plan and moving forward. So there's,
okay, I don't mean to cause a problem, it's just that I want to make sure that we're not going to expend money until we find out whether or not that's what we want to spend money for.
Correct.
So okay, so I withdraw my objection or whatever it was I gave. Thank you.
We appreciate your comments always. Thank you. Go ahead with the roll call vote. Deputy Clerk, please.
Alderman Cruzen?
Aye.
Alderman Wilson?
Aye.
Alderman Anderson?
Aye.
Alderman Berry?
Aye.
Alderman Goodman?
Aye.
Alderman Davalos?
Aye.
Alderman Weidner?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Okay, thank you everyone for your input and conversation regarding that item. Our next item is an informational update on the Old Town Redevelopment Site Number 2 actions. And Community and Economic Director Ron Menser will present the information on this topic. Ron? You need to unmute your mic, Mr. Menser.
14 months, you think I'd learn that, right? Sorry about that. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to quickly try to turn the ship around, and I'm going to report on some positive news. And there's, in my opinion, some good positive developments and progress that's been made on the Old Town Civic Center subarea, or the Old Town Redevelopment Site Number 2, since I last reported to the City Council on what was going on with that property in a forum such as this, and that was back in November of last year. So since that time, there's been a couple of things that we've accomplished that I think are especially noteworthy, and definitely wanted to make sure the council was aware of it, of these items, and address any questions or concerns you might have regarding any of these items. First is, you may recall that when we were negotiating for the potential purchase of this property, we were also negotiating concurrently with Phillips 66. Phillips 66 had an outstanding 20-plus-year-old leaking underground storage tank incident that they were responsible for on the property. And we ultimately needed to know that if we did take control of the property, that we would be able to get that old leaking underground storage tank incident closed out. So we eventually, shortly after we did acquire it, we had a kind of a letter of intent before we acquired the property with Phillips 66. After we acquired it, we finalized an agreement that the city council approved with them. Under that agreement, the city accepted responsibility to close out the old leaking underground storage tank when we would be closing out the newer leaking underground storage tanks that are associated with the property. And in exchange, Phillips 66 was to make a payment to the city of $90,000 to help offset any local costs that we had incurred to do that work on their behalf. So we have received that payment after, it was at the very end of last year, I think sometime in late November, early December, we received that $90,000 payment. It is in the city's bank account and available to use to help fund the work that we are currently doing on the property. We've also made some progress on public outreach. We created a project web page on the city's website for this particular site, and we have been updating that as we've done work and made accomplishments on that property. If you go to the city's website and if you just put in the search bar Old Town Redevelopment Site number 2, you get access to that web page. In April, we published a newsletter article in the Hometown Happenings to provide an update of where we're at with the project, some of the issues that we're dealing with on the site, and to make the community aware of the fact that we were going to be conducting a virtual public information input meeting. And we did conduct that meeting last Wednesday. It was a little disappointing that it was not all that well attended by folks in the community, but I think we gave good information on the history of the site, the city's involvement in the property, what we're trying to accomplish going forward, some of the big hurdles that we need to deal with in order to position that property for desirable redevelopment reuse. So that information, if it's not on the city's website yet, it will be posted on the city's website so that anybody in the community would have access to it going forward as kind of a reference piece of information. You may recall that when we last talked about this in November, we were getting ready to go forward with the project that eventually got implemented at the very end of last year into the beginning of 2021 that removed all of the then remaining underground storage tanks that still existed on the property and all gas pumping, underground related piping and pumping equipment above ground. That project was completed in January. The original contract for that work was approximately $115,000. In that case, I'm happy to report that because the structure of the contract included a lot of quantity-based pricing, and the quantities of stuff that we had to deal with as part of that project was less than what we had originally and conservatively estimated. The actual final construction cost for the project was closer to $85,000. The city council approved the final payment for that work at the last city council meeting. Today we received the final lien waiver from the contractor that performed that work. That lien waiver is really important to the city because it gives us the ability to complete and then submit a reimbursement application to the Illinois EPA's leaking underground storage tank program. And we expect to receive about 75% of the city's expense back through that reimbursement program in the coming months. One of the things that is very boring, but really important in the big picture is the work that we've performed since we acquired the property to negotiate with the Illinois EPA's Office of Brownfields Assistance. And we'll be talking later on in the agenda packet tonight about the Illinois EPA's revolving loan fund commitment that we've received, and that we're getting ready to finalize an intergovernmental agreement that would allow us to tap into a no interest, partially forgivable $690,000 loan that would be available for any remediation costs that are not related to the leaking underground storage tanks. And there are plenty of other contaminants and hazardous materials we have to deal with on the property. So we'll talk a little bit about that in, I think it's agenda item F6. And then finally, last but not least, more recently, we've moved forward and engaged the services of our consulting city traffic engineer, who's worked with the city for a couple decades now, and a newer planning engineering firm that is located in Cantera. Their name is Kimley Horn, and we're working with them to facilitate a site planning process that will ultimately culminate in the presentation of a more detailed proposed site redevelopment plan for the property that would be presented to the City Council at a future committee of the whole meeting for consideration and hopefully endorsement. And that's really important because that more detailed site plan will allow us, once it gets endorsed by the City Council, it will allow us to develop a more cost-effective and appropriate remediation plan for the property, because we're going to know exactly how we're going to, or we'll have a much more clear understanding of how the property is going to be used, and how the property is ultimately going to be used is going to dictate, how we clean up the different areas of the site. Just to give you an example, if there's heavy metals in the soils that exceed cleanup standards, if it's going to be used for a park type use, and it is possible that if we know that there's going to be some parking lot areas in certain locations of the property, we would not have to dig out 3-4 feet and haul that the contaminated soil and bring back new soil. We could construct a parking lot over top of it and cap it and protect it, and no one would have access to it, and it would pose no health risk to anybody. So those are the types of things that we're trying to define as part of this site plan process. The other kind of ancillary side benefit to the site planning process is that ultimately when we finalize that preliminary site plan process, it's envisioned that we'll have a professional site plan document, storyboard, you might say, that would convey effectively the city's vision for how that redevelopment would actually take place on that property. We would be able to use that to communicate, I think, more effectively with the community of what we're trying to accomplish on the property. But we'd also be able to use that to hopefully attract and communicate with desirable businesses that might be looking to expand or locate in our community. And finally, we'll use that type of piece to help attract, when and if appropriate, desirable and competent private developers to maybe get involved with some of the private redevelopment of the property. And we'll talk a little bit more about the site planning effort on the next agenda item, because one of the things we need to do, at least from a staff perspective, we're asking for is that the City Council would designate the mayor and one of the City Council members to participate on an advisory group that we are planning to use to kind of be a sounding board and help facilitate that site planning process. So that's my update, and I'd be happy to address any questions or concerns that the City Council has about where we're at with that particular project.
Okay, thank you, Director Menser, and we'll begin as usual with Alderman Anderson.
I have no questions.
Thank you. Alderman Barry?
I do have one question. It's regarding that brownfield loan. You said I didn't write the amount down, but you said it was partially refundable.
Yes.
Okay, do we have any idea as to what partially means?
Yeah, and I mean, I can go into more detail on it right now, but there's an agenda item that agenda item F6 is specifically on the agenda to talk about that. But if you want me to, I can go into it now, or we can defer that, and I'll make sure I cover that when we get to item F6.
I'm willing to wait to F6. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alderman Davalos.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have any questions. I just want to say thank you. This has been going on a long time without a lot of us knowing exactly what was going to happen, just believing that it would work, and this was money well spent. And I totally continue to think that is true. I am very positive about this project. But thank you for the work that I'm sure a lot of the staff, but especially community development, has done to make this as cost effective as possible for the city. After the Trailhead debacle, this is lovely. So thank you very much, and I'm excited. Thanks.
Thank you, Alderman Goodman.
Yeah, my one comment is to do with the Terracon consultant contract. The final price being $84,764 when we'd approved a contract for $115,000. I always appreciate it when work comes in under the bid. That is appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Alderman Krischel.
I have no questions or comments. Thank you.
Alderman Wilson. Alderman Wilson.
Okay, I'm sorry, my mic was off. I just had a question concerning the planning process. It's not just with the Citgo property, but also the properties on Batavia Road as well. Is that all included in this plan program?
Yeah, it's the preliminary site planning process is going to address the Citgo property, the former Johnson property that the city owns immediately north of the Citgo property, and then the Wangren property that the city also owns north of the Johnson property. So all of the city-owned properties at that intersection are encompassed into this site planning process. So we'll have a coordinated site redevelopment preliminary plan for the entire chunk of land that the city owns.
Okay, great. I'm looking forward to that. I think that's important. So thank you very much, Ron.
Okay, you're welcome.
Director Menser, I have one question regarding the public input, or the virtual public input session. And you expressed some disappointment in the involvement of the public. And I just wonder if you feel the city of Warrenville has adequate public awareness and input regarding this project, or whether we ought to take a second swing at it, or somehow create a public awareness effort surrounding this project, because it seems to me that public buy-in would be critically important for the city on this.
Well, what I would say is I'm not, certainly it causes me to kind of pause and rethink what we could have done that we didn't do to get the word out about the public information input meeting. That being said, we don't see that just because we don't feel that just because we didn't have a good turnout for the meeting that we did have, that we're done with the public input. I mean, we will continue to update the website. We'll continue to push out information in as appropriate and informative in the city's newsletter, and as part of the preliminary site planning process that we're just at the very front end of right now. We expect to have another public information and input meeting, and part of that meeting will be to briefly cover some of the same information we covered in the last public information and input meeting we just had last week. At the same time, talking about looking forward and what we want to see on the property from a site reuse standpoint, you might say. So it will expand, and maybe people would be more interested in learning about, what's next than they are about the problems on the property today, because that's, a lot of what we reported on at the last meeting.
We've never done anything except for zoning changes as far as signage on sites, but I just wonder whether or not, we could create a listening post or something like that by putting some kind of signage up on the site calling for input or comments or something like that. I don't know if staff would consider that or not, but that's just my thought on that. And with that, I'll ask Mayor Brummel to offer his comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for the presentation last week. It was very thorough and I thought very useful. Please, when that's available for the public, make sure that we all find out how to access that easily and it's publicized to the community so they can get the history. And then the access to the website too. Somebody might not remember CRT number 2. Let's make it as easy as possible when people go to the website to find the information that's posted on this project. That would be really good. Really appreciate all of the incredible effort over the last few years that it's gone in to get this to the point that we're at now that we own the property. We're in the process of cleaning it up with the intention of making that a nice part of the community as opposed to a detriment to the community. We're on the road to do that. We've had some success. My only question at this point is, are we absolutely sure that ComEd does not have an easement anywhere on this property?
Not that I'm aware of. We did get we did receive an Alta survey when we purchased the property, and there's no ComEd easement that would prevent us from doing what we want to do. There are some easements, some utility easements, but nothing that prevents us from accomplishing what we want.
Great, thank you.
We'll cut your mic if you make any more comments like that. Just kidding. Thank you for your comments. That was an informational item. If we don't have any other questions or comments, we'll move on to item number 4. I don't see anyone else that wants to make a comment. So the 4th agenda item this evening is consideration of the City Council representatives to serve on Old Town redevelopment site number 2 by Planning Advisory Group, and Community and Economic Development Director Ron Menser will again handle this agenda item. Director Menser, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this process is intended to be I'll call it an efficient process. We're not intending to go through start a new land use sub-area planning process. The community spoke and participated extensively when we developed the Old Town Civic Center sub-area plan, which is a lot of the policy foundation of why we got involved with this property, and the efforts that we've made to acquire property in that area is all tied to the city trying to accomplish the vision that was spelled out in general in that plan. The reality of it is that plan covered a large area. It wasn't site specific, and while it did show some type of the form of kind of redevelopment that might be appropriate on the property we're talking about right now, it didn't really correlate that vision with kind of the physical realities and the technicalities of the property, you might say. So that's what we're trying to do, is mesh the vision that was previously presented with kind of the technical realities of the existing site. So the plan is to do that primarily from a staff perspective, and then using this advisory group as a sounding board to evaluate information and make decisions, provide direction on what would be appropriate to incorporate into a preliminary site plan going forward. Ultimately, there would be a preliminary site plan that would be developed after input from the advisory group. That site plan would be presented at a public and information and input meeting for more input from the community, revised appropriately based on the input that is received and an acknowledgement of what we're trying to accomplish on the property, and then ultimately presented to the city council for review and hopefully endorsement in the next couple 3 months. The sooner we can work through that process, the sooner we can refine and define and move forward with efforts to remediate or to get the permits from the state to remediate the various contaminants on the property. I'm calling it the advisory group. From my perspective, would be the mayor, an alderman that would need to be designated by the city council, 2 plan commission members, a representative of each of the business properties that abut up to the property that we want to make sure that we are coordinating with, a representative of the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Commission, a representative from the Park District, the city's senior civil engineer, and myself would be the advisory group. We've talked in the past, and even internally, we've talked about other potential members for this advisory group, and there are other people that probably will want to have some input into what we're doing here. And based on what we're trying to accomplish with this preliminary plan, we felt that those other groups, we should make sure that they're aware of when we're having the formal public information input meeting, when we're going to have that presentation, and that there'll be an opportunity for them to provide input during that particular process. So that's kind of where we're heading. So the outcome from tonight's meeting would be hopefully to have the city council or the committee of the whole recommend to the city council that the mayor and 1 specific alderman be designated to participate in the advisory group.
Okay, thank you for the thoroughness of the report, and we'll move along with questions and comments, beginning with Alderman Anderson.
No questions.
Okay, Alderman Barry.
No questions.
Alderman Davalos.
Yeah, I get a lot of questions about this project on the Environmental Advisory Commission that I represent the council on. So there is interest out there. I'm wondering if you have any more information on exactly the commitment. Like, is this going to be years? Is it going to be a meeting every month or every couple of weeks? Do you envision what that responsibility will be? I think it would be easier for any of the aldermen to maybe decide if they had a little more information.
Yeah, that's a good question. We've structured the process so that staff and the consultant team will be doing a lot of the heavy lifting and then presenting kind of options and information for the advisory group to react to and provide feedback on. Again, this is something we're looking at having accomplished in the next 2 to 3 months, and there may be 3 touch points with the advisory group.
And you wouldn't know now if it was daytime meetings or evening meetings. At that point, you would probably poll the people, or
yeah,
stakeholders.
We haven't really discussed daytime. Yeah, we would poll the people and try to find the times that we could get the largest number of people to participate.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Goodman.
Yeah, you mentioned consultants. What kind of consultant involvement do you envision here? And in particular, I am talking about budget.
Okay, there was money in the budget last year and in this year's budget that was approved by the city council. So the traffic engineering consultants work was done primarily in last fiscal year under the money that was included in the budget for site planning work on this property. I think their contract was in the neighborhood of $7,000. And then the planning consultant that's working with us and that will help facilitate this more public process. Their contract, I believe, is like $12,000, and that's in this year's budget.
Okay, when we've done these sorts of work groups before, you know, the work group was involved in selection of the consultants, and I think you're right that this is supposed to be a slimmed down process. We're not talking about redoing the whole sub-area planning process. But I guess it's hard for me to quite picture what this is going to be like going forward if you've already had the consultants in and done the work, the traffic consultants at least. I guess I'm just trying to envision the work group's process. Could you get into that just a little more?
So one of the reasons why we hired a traffic consultant is because we really need to have a clear understanding of what area of the property could ultimately be used or needed for parking. And one of the critical decisions that needs to be made ultimately by the city council is whether or not, as part of the redevelopment of that site, there's an opportunity and desire and a commitment to introduce some new on-street parking, similar to the on-street parking that you find on the section of Batavia Road up closer to the police department and the old bank building. You know, it's on, most of it's on the other side of the road, on the east side of Batavia Road. But if you're able to have on-street parking in that area, it does definitely make the area more desirable for certain types of, say, community, commercial, retail type stuff, restaurants. And it would reduce the amount of on-site property that would need to be devoted to hard surface. So that's one of the reasons why we needed to have the engineer and consultant, traffic consultant, evaluate carefully whether or not there's legitimately an opportunity to safely add parking back in along that section of Batavia Road. Ultimately, again, that's going to be a decision from the city council. We anticipate on that particular issue sharing with the work group the analysis that the traffic engineer is just finalizing now, and traffic engineer would be at that work group meeting or available at the work group meeting. I'm not sure if it's going to be held virtually. It probably will be held virtually right now, and who knows in 2 weeks, and be able to address questions and inform the work group, or not the work group, the advisory group, technically what his thoughts are on it, and then they can make an informed decision on whether or not they think that's a good idea or not. And then that will have kind of ripple effect of what happens on the property.
Okay, thanks. That is helpful clarification. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Alderman Krischel,
I have no questions, thanks.
Alderman Wilson.
Well, I had a question because with the parking that was just talked about, depends upon, what kind of businesses you have there. So it's going to intertwine one related to the other as to the parking on the streets and as the parking off the street. So I'm interested in from that aspect of it, how we're going to handle that and work that out. So it's compatible with the area that we're talking about. Thank you.
And Mayor Brummel.
Thank you. I have no additional comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Seems like a great collection of members to be part of this advisory group. There seems like it would be the right number, under 10 people, where good discussion could take place and move towards some good decision-making processes. So thank you for your work on this. And with that, I would entertain a motion.
I would, Alderman Wilson, recommend the city council authorize the mayor and one alderman to represent the city council on the Old Town Redevelopment Site Number 2 Site Planning Advisory Group.
Second, Alderman Davalos.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, I'd like to ask
Question?
Deputy Director Menser. hold on a second. I think we have two comments. Alderman Goodman, why don't you go first?
Well, I wanted to know if we needed to name the alderman now, and I suspect that's also what the community development director was going to ask.
Okay.
That's exactly what I was going to ask. Thank you.
Would any alder be interested in joining part of the, or joining the advisory group?
Alderman Wilson would like to do that.
Okay. Are there any other aldermen who would care to join? Or we have one party that's stepping up, so that's great, and we can move along with that if there's no other recommendations coming from the council members.
Do we need to amend the motion then?
Yes, I think we would be appropriate to name Alderman Wilson as the council representative in the motion. Would you wish to amend your motion, Alderman Wilson, to include yourself on the advisory group?
If you insist.
No, you insist.
No, okay. I'd like to recommend City Council authorize the mayor and one alderman, Alderman Wilson, to represent the City Council in the Old Time Redevelopment Site 2 Site Planning Advisory Group.
The seconder agrees.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and no further discussion. Thank you, everyone, for your input. And with that, I'll turn to Deputy Clerk for a roll call vote.
Alderman Goodman,
Aye.
Alderman Widener,
Aye.
Alderman Anderson,
Aye.
Alderman Wilson,
Aye.
Alderman Berry,
Aye.
Alderman Davalos,
Aye.
Alderman Christmas.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much, and thank you for stepping up, Alderman Wilson, and volunteering for another committee. Appreciate your input and advice on all these groups.
Thank you.
And thank you, Director Menser, for creating this process. It looks like a good project, and I look forward to seeing it move forward. Thank you. The next item is consideration of extension of temporary auxiliary outdoor seating program. And Community and Economic Development Director Menser will again present this item. Ron?
This is just to start and make it clear, this is an action item, potentially an action item by the Committee of the Whole. You may recall that not quite a year ago, in June of 2020, the City Council approved a kind of a special emergency, almost temporary auxiliary outdoor seating program that allowed businesses to expand and install new outdoor seating in areas that might not otherwise normally have been permitted prior to the establishment of that program through a special licensing permitting process that for the most part was handled administratively by staff. So it required very little special lengthy approval process that would run through the Plan Commission or City Council. So it was received fairly well by the business community in Warrenville. And I think we reported last year there was 9 or 10 different restaurants that took advantage and did expand or install new outdoor seating in areas out associated with their business as part of that. Last October, the City Council approved an extension to that program until June of 2021, which is coming up shortly, and thus the need to do something with that program. So what, from a staff perspective, we worked with the city attorney, and included in the agenda packet backup is a proposed ordinance that would reauthorize and extend the temporary outdoor auxiliary program until the earlier of one of the three following: 45 days after the termination or lapsing of the governor's state of emergency order that's related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Or secondly, repeal by the city council. The city council would just need to pass an ordinance to repeal that program if for some reason they felt that that was necessary and appropriate, regardless of what happens at the state level. And last, if we don't meet any of those other two thresholds first, it would automatically sunset on December 1st of 2021. We feel that the program has been successful and valuable. I'm not aware of any significant or even really minor issues that surfaced as a result of the operation of the program last year. And we are recommending that the ordinance in the agenda packet backup gets approved. One kind of ancillary benefit that I would want to acknowledge if the ordinance is approved, that it would give us city staff and the city attorney a little more time and breathing room to create some permanent modifications, finalized draft presents some permanent modifications to the zoning ordinance and to the city code that would carry over and implement some of the elements of this program on a more permanent, ongoing basis.
Thank you. Alderman Anderson, questions, comments?
No questions. The only comment, I'm supportive of this recommendation.
Thank you. Alderman Berry?
No comments.
Alderman Davalos?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman?
I think we should just say December 1 and be done with it and not have all these ifs and ands in it. I think that's inconsiderate to our business owners, making the end of the program somewhat iffy because they have to do advertising, sign rental agreements for equipment, that sort of thing. We should give them some assurances if they're going to invest in this. I think people like the outdoor seating. I think I've heard a lot of comments from friends saying, gosh, we should make this a more common thing. Just because the governor declares the end of the pandemic, I don't think we should rescind our restaurants' rights to have this program for a fixed period of time. And I think that would agree with staff's recommendation to give staff a little bit more time to prepare the city code amendments. If Governor Pritzker declares something tomorrow, why should that affect us? So I would modify the amendment to the resolution to either delete section B of or subsection B of section 4 of the ordinance, or just change it to say December 1. And also there is a grammar mistake in section 3 while you're amending the ordinance. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Alderman Crucial?
I have no questions or comments. Thank you.
Alderman Wilson?
I just think that the state's beyond COVID-19 restrictions, so that carries us through December if we want, or January.
Hey, thank you. And Mayor Brummel?
I have nothing to add, thank you.
Thank you. Director Menser, any final thoughts or comments?
I am supportive of Alderman Goodman's suggestion. That would give us more time and free us up. And given the fact that we have not had any material issues with these operations, I don't think we're putting anybody at risk by extending it just right to December 2021. So I'm in agreement with that amendment. I would support it.
Okay, and I don't know if any the council members this evening have any disagreement with what Alderman Goodman is proposing and what Director Menser thought was a good idea. If anybody has any objection, please speak up.
Alderman Widener,
Yeah.
This is Alderman Anderson. I don't know if city attorney's on, but Alderman Goodman may know. Do we have to tie ourselves to the state order? Are there liability protections that are tied to that order, which is the reason that we would link those two, or is the liability risk neutral with regards to the order?
This is Alderman Goodman. I am obviously not the city attorney and I can't speak for her, but I don't see any way in which our liability would change one way or the other if we include that in this resolution.
Director Menser, did you have a comment?
I don't have a specific answer, but I am committed to having that conversation with the city attorney. And if for some reason she feels it needs, that connection needs to stay in there, we'll report that back at the next city council meeting. Otherwise, if it's okay with the council, we'll adjust it to be simpler and just deadline or sunset on the end of or beginning of December.
Okay.
I'm fine with that.
I see everybody seems to be in agreement with that, and we can go ahead with a motion. If you would like to phrase that for us, Alderman Goodman, it would be appreciated.
Certainly. I would make a motion to recommend that the City Council approve an ordinance as amended by the City Attorney and staff, reauthorizing and extending the auxiliary outdoor seating area program until December 1st, 2021.
Second, Alderman Davalos.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, we'll go on with a vote. Deputy Clerk, may I please have the roll call?
Alderman Berry?
Aye.
Alderman Goodman?
Aye.
Alderman Widener?
Aye.
Alderman Critchell?
Aye.
Alderman Anderson?
Aye.
Alderman Davalos?
Aye.
Alderman Wilson?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you for your suggestions. And we'll move forward with an informational update on draft Illinois Environmental Protection Agency revolving loan fund intergovernmental agreement for the Old Town redevelopment site number 2. And again, the Community Development Director, Menser, will present this item. Ron?
Okay, thank you. The purpose and intent of including this item on tonight's agenda is to give the City Council an update, certainly, but also just as important, if not more important, give the Council an opportunity to ask questions, provide input before staff and the city's environmental attorney and consultant finalize the details of the intergovernmental agreement with the state of Illinois, different people at the state of Illinois, and then present it for formal City Council consideration and action at an upcoming meeting. So you may recall that when we were, again, thinking back to about this time last year, we were in negotiations with the former owner of the property and all kinds of other people trying to understand what our exposure would be if we ended up purchasing the property, taking ownership of it. And part of the work that we were doing at that point in time was trying to line up and get some, connect ourselves with some outside, as much outside funding as possible. At the time, we submitted a preliminary revolving loan fund application. And it was preliminary in the sense that, we didn't have all the numbers finalized, and it was submitted on with the concept that, we didn't even own the property, and it was something that we wanted to get some feedback from the people at the state that make a decision about those types of outside funding assistance loans. And they did, in theory, kind of give us a preliminary approval of our application, which was important because we knew that the project would qualify. But even more important is that they basically worked with the federal government, who is the money behind these loans. It gets funneled from the federal government through the state of Illinois and then to recipients like the city of Warrenville in this case, that they were able to earmark monies that had been promised to them from the federal government to the city of Warrenville's project. So that money is earmarked. $690,000 is earmarked for the city of Warrenville's use, subject to the city and the state finalizing an acceptable intergovernmental agreement. And that's what we've been working on, trying to negotiate that intergovernmental agreement, the details of it since we took ownership of the property last year. You'll see in the agenda packet backup materials, there's quite a lot to the agreement. It's a long agreement. Doesn't even, what I provided doesn't even have, all the exhibits aren't finalized at this point in time. There is tons of details in there that we needed to make sure that we were comfortable with. There's been a lot of adjustments to a lot of the standard requirements and obligations and provisions that the state normally has because of the kind of the unique nature of this property and this project. One of the unique elements of this project that is very rare for the state to allow these funds to be used for is demolition and asbestos remediation type costs. Those normally aren't things that they get involved with, but in this case, we were able to negotiate that into the agreement. So, a big share of demolition and environmental hazardous asbestos and hazardous building material remediation costs will be covered under this no interest loan. It is a up to $690,000. It's a reimbursement, so the city spends the money, and then we get reimbursed for the eligible costs under the intergovernmental agreement, up to $690,000. When it's all said and done, if the city does move through and acquire a no further remediation letter from the state of Illinois, signifying that the property has been cleaned up appropriately, then the up to 30%, but not more than $200,000 of the loan would be forgiven. Whatever is remaining in the loan would be repaid. The first 4 years after the loan's executed, there's no payments, and after the fourth year, then there's going to be 7 under the structure of the loan. There's 7 equal payments. So it's basically 12 years from when the loan, or 11 years from when the loan gets signed to when we would make the last repayment on the loan. And it does give us the ability to use outside funding, some of which would be kind of a grant, to cover some of the costs that are not already reimbursable through the leaking underground storage tank program. So the primary things are the demolition costs, the asbestos and hazardous building material remediation costs, and all the various costs related to dealing with the heavy metal contamination in the soils on the property. So from my perspective, I think this is a good opportunity from the city. It gives us, takes some stress off of the need to rely on the general fund to help fund a lot of these things up front, or alternatively, if we didn't get this loan and we didn't want to rely on the general fund because of its current condition and stress on it, we would just have to forego and delay doing this type of work. So this gives us the ability at really no cost to get this work done sooner than later and reposition the property and hopefully get it back into some state of productivity sooner than later. And given it's in a TIF district, from my perspective, that's a very desirable thing to get some positive private development on it that will start generating TIF revenue during the life of the TIF.
Well, thank you for the update. I appreciate it. And with that, I'll turn it over to Alderman Anderson for questions or comments.
No questions.
Alderman Barry?
Okay, well, I guess I figured out the amount, which is the lesser of 30% or $200,000. So at $690,000, the lesser is $200, because the 30% would be $207,000. So that would be the amount of money that would be forgiven. So that's at least something, as long as we could get that NFR letter in our possession. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Davalos?
Yeah, no, my only comment is I think this is great. Any money we can get for free and any financial arrangement that is no interest, I think this is a win. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Goodman.
Yes, I guess I don't have much to say on this. I hope we actually get the $200,000 forgiven. It seems pretty certain. But looking through this paperwork, there's a lot of hoops to jump through for a no interest loan when interest rates have sort of never historically been this low. So that's not as valuable as it has been in the past, but it's better than having to front the money ourselves, certainly when we have such low fund balances right now. So there is still some advantage here. I guess that's all I've got.
Thank you. Alderman Crucial.
Yeah, quick question. The repayment, you mentioned there was no repayment for the first 4 years, and then it was a 7-year after that, so it's an 11-year term. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
I think I might have put 12 years in the somewhere in the backup.
Okay, that was my only question. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Wilson.
This is my comment. I like that budgetary impact. None at this time. I'll buy that. I approve.
All right. Thank you. And Mayor Brummel.
Thank you, Ron, for another great effort to move this project forward. There are certainly some advantages to this, not the least of which, of course, is saving the community $200,000. So thanks again. I'm in favor of your recommendation.
Again, thank you, Mr. Menser. Appreciate it. And we'll move ahead if there's nothing else. That was an informational item. We'll move ahead to the item number 7. Consideration of a resolution waiving competitive bidding and approving a contract to replace the filter and SCADA controls, SCADA, at all number 9 public, it's site number 9. And Public Works Director Phil Kukler will present this item. Welcome, Mr. Kukler.
Thank you and good evening. You may or may not know, well number 9 is located at the corner of Warrenville Road and Maycliff Drive by the city's water tower at that site. It's one of 4 city wells that supply water to the city's water system. The replacement of the filter and SCADA controls was planned for in the fiscal year 22 budget. And Metropolitan Pump is the sole provider of this equipment in this region. And the city uses the same equipment at each site for consistency in the city's system. So staff is recommending waiving competitive bidding for this equipment and approving the contract with Metropolitan Pump. At this point, I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you. Alderman Anderson?
No questions or comments.
Thank you. Alderman Barry?
I have no questions.
Thank you. Alderman Davalos?
Nothing on this item, thanks.
And Alderman Goodman?
No questions.
Thank you. Alderman Crucial?
Nothing for me, thanks.
And Alderman Wilson?
I have no comments.
Okay, it's up to you, Mayor Brummel. Any kind of comments or questions?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'd entertain a motion.
This is Alderman Goodman. I'd like to make a motion to recommend that the City Council pass a resolution waiving competitive bidding and approving a contract to Metropolitan Pump Company in the amount of $25,240.02 to replace the filter and SCADA controls at well number 9 on Warrenville Road.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Deputy Clerk Gravetti, will you please read the roll call?
Alderman Davalos?
Aye.
Alderman Crucial?
Aye.
Alderman Widener?
Aye.
Alderman Wilson?
Aye.
Alderman Barry?
Aye.
Alderman Goodman?
Aye.
Alderman Anderson?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Our next item is consideration of a resolution waiving competitive bidding and approving a contract to replace the control panel at the Warren Avenue lift station. once again, Public Works Director Kukler will present this item. Phil?
Thank you. This is very similar to the last item, and except in this case, it's for a lift station on Warren Avenue, which is one of 11 lift stations in the city's sanitary sewer system. And once again, it was planned for in the fiscal year 22 budget, and we're recommending Metropolitan Pump and waiving competitive bidding because Metropolitan is the sole provider of the equipment in this region. With that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you. Alderman Anderson?
No questions.
Thank you. Alderman Barry?
No questions. Thank you.
Alderman Davalos?
No questions.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman?
Just one small question. The quote says, City of Warrenville to install or provide all installation and new conduits if required. So we're doing all the installation on this?
Yes, we are
Okay.
on this one.
Okay, just wasn't clear. So this is just for the purchase of the parts. Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Crucial?
No questions.
Thank you. And Alderman Wilson?
No questions.
Okay. Mayor Brummel, anything?
No questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. With that, it would be great if someone could present a motion.
Alderman Davalos, I would like to recommend City Council pass a resolution waiving competitive bidding and approving a contract to Metropolitan Pump Company in the amount of $29,689 to replace a control panel at the Warren Avenue lift station.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I don't think there's any further comment. Deputy Clerk, would you please read the roll?
Alderman Barry?
Aye.
Alderman Widener?
Aye.
Alderman Crucial?
Aye.
Alderman Wilson?
Aye.
Alderman Goodman?
Aye.
Alderman Anderson?
Aye.
Alderman Davalos?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. With that, we move on to item number 9, which is to review in the file the Community Development Department's fiscal year 2021 work plan update. This is for our information. I'll quickly go through the council list and see if anybody has any questions or comments. Alderman Anderson?
I have no questions or comments.
Thank you. Alderman Barry?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Davalos?
No questions.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman?
Nothing from me.
Alderman Crucial?
No questions or comments. Thank you.
And Alderman Wilson?
No comments.
Okay, and our final report to review and file this evening is the always excellent Community Development Department fiscal year 2021 work plan update. Oh, I'm sorry. It's to review and file the always excellent bi-monthly code enforcement activity report. There we go. Does anyone have any comments or questions regarding this item? If so, just speak up or raise your hand. Okay, we'll review and file that. Before we ask for a motion to adjourn, I'd just like to thank the city staff for their high degree of professionalism and for providing all the great information and materials that make it easy for us to deliberate and carry through with these meetings. So thank you. Does anyone care to make a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn and thank you for all the contribution.
Second, Alderman Davalos.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I think everyone will withhold further conversation and we can go ahead with the roll call, Deputy Clerk.
Chairman Widener?
Aye.
Alderman Anderson?
Aye.
Alderman Barry?
Aye.
Alderman Davalos?
Aye.
Alderman Goodman?
Aye.
Alderman Crucial?
Aye.
Alderman Wilson?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for your participation tonight, and have a good evening. Take care.
Good night.
Good night.
Good
Thank you,
night.
Bill.